I know that you've been part of an IEP meeting where there is a lot of buzz before the meeting because the parents have an advocate. Working with an advocate does not have to be all doom and gloom. I definitely have some negative experiences working with advocates for sure. You probably heard them here on the podcast, but I've had some really positive experiences working with advocates as well. And they definitely have a seat at the IEP table. So today we're talking all about what does an advocate do? And can you have positive and collaborative experiences with an advocate? I believe that you can. I have had those experiences in the past. And I'm talking today with April Rehrig. What is so fascinating about April? She is an advocate, but she has 20 years of experience as a school psychologist, teacher, and parent in the public school setting. So she really understands the ins and outs of navigating the public school. And she is positive and really a bright spot in the field. She has courses and she has trainings and she offers advocacy as well, no matter where you are located. She really is a breath of fresh air. I'm excited for you to tune on into this and to learn, what does an advocate do? They don't just come to meetings and say mean things to public school staff. That is what you may think if you have been on the other side of the IEP table with an advocate, but it can be a positive and collaborative experience. So we were breaking that all down today. If you like this episode, make sure that you leave me a podcast review over on Apple Podcasts and say, hey, that was an interesting episode. I love to hear your thoughts and feedback about the show. Let's get in on this conversation with April Rehrig.
You're listening to Autism Outreach Podcast, a podcast full of ready-to-use strategies to help those with autism strengthen their communication skills. Here's your host, Rose Griffin of ABA Speech, a speech therapist and board-certified behavior analyst who shares tips you can use in your next therapy session.
Welcome to the Autism Outreach Podcast. I am excited for our show today, just like I am for every single show. I love that I get to run this podcast and talk to really interesting people each and every week and share those conversations with all of you. Today we have with us April Rehrig. Thanks so much, April, for coming on. I'm delighted to talk with you today.
Thanks so much, Rose.
And I know that you're an advocate and a mom and lots of other things just from our intro talking today. So I'm excited to learn more about you and your journey. Can you tell us this about you, your background, and what really drew you into the work that you're doing now?
Thanks for asking. It's definitely a story and a journey, like lots of your listeners out there, especially your parents. So I've always been interested in special education and about neurodiverse students. When I was a teenager, I got a chance to volunteer in a school because back in those days, they had a special education schools a lot more than they do now. And I fell in love. I loved it. I became a teacher. And even though I was a psychologist undergrad, they didn't talk about school psychology. It wasn't ever discussed. However, I was always volunteering in classrooms, before and after care, YMCA. And my first year as a teacher, they stuck me with 16 boys in my class and 4 girls. And because I was a new teacher, I got all the difficult students. So sure enough, I had several students, one in particular who was failing. And I thought, I know everything. This student definitely has a learning disability. He's failing my class. He must have a disability. So I referred him for testing. I met the school psychologist in a closet, which we typically tend to work in. And at the meeting, they went over everything and they said, April, he is definitely struggling. However, it's not because he has a learning disability. He actually is quite gifted and he doesn't qualify for an IEP. So I was blown away and it was not what I was expecting. And it turned me on to school psychology. So I became a school psychologist for about 20 years. I worked all over the city. I'm from Los Angeles. So I worked in all different kinds of schools and all different kinds of settings. And I quickly realized that the way that IEPs are run and the way that parents are kind of left on the side as the IEP is held is frustrating. And as a school psychologist and a teacher, I experience the same thing, right? Where we come together at the last minute and I'm trying to get all my stuff ready and we all sort of show up in the meeting and there isn't really like an organized way of how we meet. And at the same time, I also discovered that so many parents, they would say, I want my child to be tested. And as a school psychologist, I would get their letters and I'm like, okay, but what am I testing for? So I didn't want to give the standard battery that we're trained to give. And I didn't want to do my assessments in that way. So I always kind of did them from a strength-based approach.
Mm.
And over the years, I fostered different school psychologists and I taught them my same approach. And so I decided to leave school psychology after 20 years because I knew that we could reach across the aisle and that school psychologists can talk to advocates and advocates can talk to parents. And the only way to make things better is to craft a different way and a new way of meeting and communicating. And so I formulated Rise and my online workshops and advocacy services where I reach across the table and we work together to resolve issues.
Oh, I love that. So how long have you had Rise then? How long have you had this business?
It's been about 3 years now that I have been an official advocate. However, I've always been advocating for my kids. So yeah, I guess it's a lot longer than 3 years.
Okay. Oh, nice. Okay. I did it one time. I got really interested in advocacy because I used to, I don't anymore. I don't have time. We have a contractor now that sees the in-home clients, but I used to provide that service. And I felt like a lot of what I did was advocacy for my clients because I was in their home. And that's just like a very special relationship you have with those clients. And oftentimes they were new to navigating special education, whether it was a kid that was working on a speech sound or a kid with autism. They didn't know how to deal with public schools. And I was like, oh, that's what I do. Like I've been a school-based SLP in some capacity for the past 20 years. And so I really liked being able to help parents in that way because they feel like they can't ask the school district certain questions or they're not sure. They don't want to offend anybody. At least that's the vibe where I actually live. My hometown's a pretty small area. And I liked being able to do that. I actually joined COPA one year and I took the rights law course and I got the books. And I really think it's neat because I think advocacy can be really kind of positive. I definitely have had positive experiences with advocates and experiences that were really negative and really terrible too. And I'm sure that a lot of people listening have had those same. And even like an email came across my desk the other day from a fellow BCBA that does some work for us. And she said, this parent wants an advocate. And I was letting her know about some of the other ones. And they're like, no, they want one that's really nasty. And I was like, oh dear. And like, there's definitely a list of the ones that are collaborative and then the ones that kind of get things done, I guess. But I'm wondering what types of services do you offer as an advocate? I like the idea of reaching across the table or whatever your line was there, which is nice. Because old school pre-COVID, when we would have in-person meetings, it definitely is like an us versus them. It's like, okay, here's the school district. And because of what I do, the SLP and BCBA, I have always been in contentious IEP meetings for the past 20 years. So it's definitely something I'm extremely used to. And it would be like, okay, here's the school team and our lawyer. And then here is the parents, their advocate, their lawyer. And it's an us versus they mentality. It really is because we're sitting on opposite sides of the table and that visual just brings up that. So I like that kind of slogan you use there because it's relatable. So what types of services do you offer as an advocate? I'm curious.
So like I mentioned before, I'm very collaborative and I'm very different. First of all, for your listeners to know, I am virtual. So I do practice, even though I'm here in Los Angeles, I practice with parents and clients across the country, which is a game changer. And my services are unique in that I provide training embedded in my advocacy services. So a typical advocate, you hire them, they ghostwrite a letter, they show up at a meeting. But what I found as an advocate in the very beginning is that parents were like, okay, you need to teach me what, but I want to know how. How do I do this myself, right? And many, many parents out there cannot afford to keep someone on retainer for months and months on end. They're like, can you write a letter for me? Can you help me with this? And so that's why I crafted my online curriculum. So I have courses and the courses are on demand and they're available for anybody to purchase. And so part of my services is that if you hire me as an advocate, we meet I do a complete record review, which for parents that don't know, I look at all the IEPs and we develop an action plan. And from there, we don't just jump into an IEP meeting because there's no strategy. There's always a strategy. And so we need to look at, okay, what are the gaps? What's going on? And parent, what do you want me to do, right? What is not working and what do you want to do better? And then we craft, okay, here's going to be our action plan. We're going to either ask for an updated testing, or we're going to teach you how to write a parent letter of attachment, or I'll train you how to write your own parent report so that you feel like you can meaningfully participate. So my advocacy services are virtual. They are combining training and coursework along with template letters that I train them how to do themselves. And I am more of a coach, meaning I do not file due process. I do not do compliance complaints. That's great for other advocates. I find they're very expensive and inefficient to resolve the issue and get the child's services, which is the most important thing.
Yeah.
And then, like I mentioned before, my workshops are available for anybody. So if you need something and you have an IEP tomorrow, you can take the workshop. If you need to get your child tested and you need great templates, letters, and understanding how to navigate the process, how to go through the journey, what's a prior written notice, I have a workshop for that. And if you need to read a report and you have this 30-page, assessment report, and you're like, I don't know what it means, I have a reports course. So I have those services combined with the advocacy. And then I also do group training. So I'll come to an SLP organization and do that, or work with BCBAs, or in some cases in California, we have regional centers, and I'll go to the regional center and help parents with that. So I kind of do different services and supports.
Yeah.
And for families with 504 plans, I have guidebooks that you can purchase that walk you through the process, whether it's going to college, accessing disability supports, or having a 504 and continuing to get the right support with your 504.
Well, that's nice, because I feel like parents would really benefit from that information. Sometimes it's just hard to navigate all these things, especially if it's a child and it's your first time ever with maybe maybe your child doesn't qualify, but maybe they're on a 504 with accommodations. What does that even mean for people? And I think there's just so much to navigate. And the fact that you were a school psychologist, like I work at a school 2 days a week. So I was talking to my school psychologist today. School psychologists are so specific and detail oriented. So I'm sure the information that you're sharing is really, really helpful. And to have been on the inside where you have done all the testing and, qualifying for disabilities, and you really have such a thorough understanding. I love that background for you. I think that is probably makes you just really, really helpful. So, because I think a lot of us think of as an advocate, a lot of related service providers think of an advocate as somebody who just comes to an IEP meeting to outline disagreements that the school district has with the staff. And so it doesn't really have to be that way. And I have had collaborative experiences with advocates who maybe we have a student who has a very low incidence type of disability. And it's almost like an advocate, one that's more collaborative, when everybody does get along, is just kind of helping everybody stay on the same page. So I definitely have had those types of experiences. I guess my question goes to, can an advocate, parent, and a school team have a positive collaborative experience? And do you have a time that you could share with us where you were brought on and it wasn't for something where there was a disagreement, but there was on something that was a little bit more collaborative? Maybe you helped the parent in a specific way.
Yeah, that's a great question, Rose. Yes, absolutely. I truly believe that you can have a collaborative experience. When it comes to IEPs, if you think about the meeting, right? The meeting is kind of the end portion. So the only way to kind of reform special education, and I think all of your listeners can agree, there needs to be reform. It's not so much creating more laws. It's not so much creating more difficult IEPs, which some of my colleagues would disagree with you there. It's really about education and about training for everybody. And that's where it comes down to. And so as an advocate, if you come in and you're like, my client wants this, my client wants that, it doesn't go back to the core. And the core of it is the assessment and what kind of assessment and functional academics, meaning what can the child actually do. So to give you an example, I worked with a parent where they reached out to me and they said, okay, April, we just had the initial IEP and I spent 2 years trying to get my child tested. And I saw that every day as a school psychologist. And they came to the meeting and they were like, you know what? Your child is struggling, but the one test score is showing a little bit off. So they're not struggling enough. So they don't qualify for an IEP. We're going to recommend a 504 plan. So mom reached out to me crying and she was like, I don't understand. I told them, I thought I trusted them. And so her trust was broken. She was upset and angry. So what we did is we went through the initial assessment together and we talked about, okay, what did the psych give for the testing? What did you say? And she said, but I told them my child was struggling with executive functioning. But when I looked at her request letter, when mom and I chatted and I saw all the paperwork, it wasn't documented in the right way. So the psychologist, in their defense, they didn't know what to look for. And that's where it comes back to knowing what to ask for. So we went back to the school psych and we said, you know what? We don't disagree with your assessment, but there's some missing information. So we want another assessment. We didn't file due process. We said we want another assessment by a different assessor, fresh eyes. And here's the area mom is concerned in. Mom wrote a parent letter of attachment. She wrote a parent report. I'm doing outside therapy. My child's on medication. There's this, this, and this. The psychologist is like, oh, okay. So they gave a different battery of tests and some supplemental assessments. Sure enough, the child qualified. Mom went back. The team was like, you're getting the IEP. Mom was crying. She was like, now I know what I needed to say. Mom didn't know the right words to use. And that's where it came down to, is understanding how and when to communicate. So it wasn't necessarily the school was wrong. The psychologist did a poor assessment. The psychologist didn't know what to look for, and the parent didn't know what to ask for. And that's that communication gap. That's where us as advocates, that's where us on the IEP teams can really do a better job of saying, what do you want, parent? And the parent say, this is what I'm asking for.
Right. Yeah, I think that's what's hard, is like getting to the main concern of the parent. Sometimes, the district I work in now is great. The district I worked in for 10 years, parents were very, very affluent, and we're in an area where there are a lot of non-public programs for autistic learners who engaged in unsafe problem behavior. So oftentimes parents would move into our district, which I used to call the Bentley of public school services, because it was. We had like 3 SLP BCBAs on staff out of like 11 in the state, but I could go on and on. But they moved in to try to catapult into a non-public program. And so that led to kind of like a combative, from the get-go. I think the other thing that's really hard for school staff, because I've worked in non-public programs too, ABA centers, I'm a speech therapist in BCBA, is it can just be really difficult to understand what is a medical model. Just talking about speech therapy alone, what is a medical model for speech therapy? Meaning I could go up to anybody and say, I really want my son to be able to do communication wise, and I could pay a private speech therapist for that, versus how does a student qualify in a school setting and showing that there's an adverse impact on their educational performance. And every single district is going to be different in how does a student qualify? And I'm here in Ohio, so it's different from California, I'm sure. How does a student qualify? What do you do for the kids who maybe just need some intervention? Or what does your MTSS look like? That's going to look so different from where I am sitting right now versus like 2 communities over. So I think it can be really, really hard for parents. And I think what's hard as a school-based provider, not in the district I'm in now because it's friendlier. In my old district, parents would say, well, would my child benefit from outside therapy? Probably. Probably. They probably would. As a school-based therapist, even if I saw a kid 3 days a week, because I had some students on that frequency of therapy, yeah. But you can't say that as a school-based provider. That's what's hard, because then some parents will say, oh, well, you said that they would benefit, so now the district has to pay for it. I mean, I know you've heard all these things, but it gets really tricky. So it's like you can't be your true self in this. I was like, this is why I started my whole business, because I had so much to say at the IEP table, April, but I worked in such a litigious district that you really only spoke when someone spoke to you. And so that was just training of being in these really high profile, contentious cases. So I wouldn't talk at work, and then, I guess I started my whole business. So that was nice. But it can be really hard for school-based professionals because they can't always share those things. And it's confusing for parents too to understand that there is really a difference between what qualifies in a school versus what a student would maybe benefit from private therapy. Do you see parents having trouble navigating that? And maybe you had, when you were a school psychologist, that was probably hard for you too, maybe not qualifying a student, even though they would benefit from the service.
Right, right. So when it comes down to eligibility for special education, federal law uses what's called a three-pronged test. I don't know if you're familiar with the three-pronged test. So the three-pronged test for any eligibility across any state based on IDEA principles has to do with, does the child have a disability? Are they a child with disability with exceptional needs? It's also known as an IWIN. So do they have that? Then the second part is there an adverse impact on their education? Now, for some eligibilities, let's say other health impairment, the impact is kind of gray in terms of, yes, there's an eligibility, but it's not set. Other eligibilities like speech and language, a lot of states have certain percentage points, right? Where it means, or in certain states, if you're trying to qualify as a student with a specific learning disability, there's patterns of strengths and weaknesses. There is a medical-based model. There's a 15-point discrepancy. There's all this yada, yada. That's not important. What's really important is, does the child benefit from specially designed instruction, also known as SDIs? So, case in point, I had a parent come to me and they said, okay, April, what would be better for my child? They have ADHD. Would it be better for them to have a 504, or would it be better for them to have an IEP? We did a record review. I looked through all the documents. It wasn't so much which one is better. It's what their child needed. In this case, the child was twice exceptional. They were in honors and lots of high placement classes in the high school. And I saw this all the time as a school psychologist. And I asked the parent, I said, what do you want? She's like, what do you mean? I said, what do you want? Do you want your child to get services, or do you want to get accommodations? And she said, well, I think he just needs extended time, and he needs to be able to have a break and be able to have things taught slightly differently. He doesn't need services. And I said, okay, well, then you've just answered your own question. And then we talked to her son, and I asked her son, what do you want? And he said, you know what? I just want a little bit of support. So we went back and we requested for the 504. So it really comes down to, what does the child need? Not so much about the eligibility, this and that. So some children need more support than others. And as you know, working in different kinds of districts, even if they say, oh, we have a resource class, or we have a self-contained, or we're fully, immersed and we're fully inclusive, every school offers kind of different supports, and it shouldn't be like that, but that is some consideration. So if you find out, oh, okay, we don't have a lot of supports with this service, then maybe pick the service that's best for your child, and not necessarily, what you think. So it really comes down to your child and what they need.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. So how do all parents pay out of pocket for advocates? I think this is probably a good question that maybe people don't realize. It's an out of pocket expense, correct?
It is an out-of-pocket expense. However, there are many advocacy agencies out there. I used to work for one in Los Angeles that are free. And they do have that. And then also, if you, at least in California, if you work through what's called the regional centers and you are not getting the supports you need, or you need Medi-Cal and you're trying to ask for services, you get denied, they also have state agencies that have advocates that will support you. So it typically, for an advocate who works through a school district, it is fee-based. However, there are advocates that work low income, free, sliding scale, all those different varieties.
Okay. Oh, that's good to know. So how can parents find an advocate in their area if that is something that they are interested in?
That's a good question. I wrote a blog about this actually specifically. And it was talking about the difference between an advocate, an IEP coach, and an attorney, because this is a big area that's
Yeah.
confusion. So first of all, before you search for an advocate, you need to know what you're searching for.
Mm-hmm.
So are you looking to file due process? Are you looking to get what's called comp ed, compensatory ed? You want someone to pay for something. If you're looking for that, an attorney is up your alley. If you're looking for someone that just a little bit of support, or someone who maybe just slightly, some information, then you're looking for a coach. If you're looking for an advocate, and this is your avenue, then you want to do some homework, because there's a huge range of what an advocate does. And for those of your listeners that don't know, advocates are not licensed. I have a board certification, which is kind of different, but most advocates can call themselves an advocate, just like a life coach. There is no set standard. So you need to do your homework before you choose an advocate. And here's what you need to look for. You need to look for someone who is well-versed in the school district you're looking at, or is well-versed in the area that your child is struggling in. So you don't want to go to an advocate who typically works with high schoolers and your child is 3 years old. You also want to look for an advocate that has your style. So, like you were mentioning earlier in the call, sometimes advocates are known for being harsh. Some advocates are known for working across the aisle. You need to pick who works with your personality. And how would you find that out? By talking to them and asking them questions. Have you practiced in my child's school district? Have you filed? If you're looking for an attorney, you always want to ask, what is your rate of settlement agreements? How many cases have you won? If you're looking for an IEP coach, you'll want to ask, what experience do you have with this? What certifications do you have? What associations are you joined up? So you really want to do your homework when you're looking for an advocate. And then, just like all of us, going on Google, going on Yelp, going on all these things, there are reviews out there, and then finding out what they are, and then talking to your advocate. So it's not like you need to find the first advocate and say, that's the only game in town. Now, getting real here, in some parts of the country, just like supermarkets, there's like a desert, right? There can be advocacy deserts where there's not a lot of choices. But I want your viewers to know, and your listeners to know, that you have the right to ask your advocate questions, and you have the right to say, do you have this? Do you have that? Can you provide it for me? Any good advocate will be more than willing to share what they know, who they've worked with, where they've worked, because you're a consumer. And so you want to find the right fit for you.
I think that's why I'm very intrigued by your background, because you're a school psychologist. So you really understand public schools. I think sometimes people will have a child with a disability and they'll maybe have a bad experience, and then they'll take training and they'll become an advocate, and that's fine. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think somebody who has been on the other side, who has actually worked in a public school, understands really the eligibility criteria and how all that stuff works. Really makes you impressive, Rachel. I'm very impressed here. So where can people find out more about you and your work?
Thanks for asking, Rose. So they can go to my website, riseeducationaladvocacy.com. If they want to contact me, they go to riseeducationaladvocacy.com contact. They can follow us on Instagram, where I give 2 reels a week and get free information there. They can find me on LinkedIn. Instagram, it's Rise Ed Advocacy. And if they want to interview with me and they're thinking about hiring an advocate, they can go to riseeducationaladvocacy.com/contact and fill out an intake.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It was great to meet with you.
It was wonderful to meet with you, Rose. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to Autism Outreach. If you enjoyed the show today, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode full of actionable strategies you can use in your therapy room. Write a review too. That would mean so much to me. I always love hearing from you. Have a specific topic that you want included on a future show? Reach out over on Instagram, ABA Speech by Rose, or visit me at www.abaspeech.org.